Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. My name is Drew. I'm an exercise physiologist and Chinese medicine practitioner, primarily in acupuncture and qigong. And my job is to teach people how to recover from injury and illness via exercise, particularly. So if we can help someone with a health condition with an exercise program, it's my job to help people figure out what's the best stuff to do. And when you understand functional anatomy in terms of exercise prescription, it just makes things a lot more clearer. So the whole point of this series is to explore functional anatomy from more of a movement perspective. And so that if you're a personal trainer, a massage therapist, a body worker, or just somebody really interested in anatomy, it'll help you understand what you're doing for yourself and also with your clients. So with having all that said, let's get stuck in today's lesson, and we're going to be looking at this awesome muscle here called the Quadratus Lumborum. Quad meaning four, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 sides. So this is probably like your primary lower back muscle, the muscle that most folks will strain when they do a back injury. Majority of back problems are related to muscular issues. And then we also have connective tissue, say ligaments, and disc pathology and stuff like that, which are the more serious ones. But majority of folks at some point will get a lower back sprain just because essentially, if you look at just the function of the body, we zoom out, you've got the entire torso upstairs, and then you've got the lower limb downstairs, and in between, what we've got is the vertebral column, the five lumbar vertebrae coming through here. And the only thing that's kind of gluing or keeping the top half stacked on the bottom half correctly is the muscular system around the waist between the ribs and the pelvis. There's no other structural support except for the spine going up through the middle. So this is the importance of core stability or core training or a functional inner unit, whatever terminology you want to give it. Basically, what we're talking about is, are these muscles working? Are they strong enough? Are they flexible enough? Have they got appropriate motor control to stabilize and move the spine and the torso and the pelvis in a coordinated fashion so that we can actually get about and do the things we want to do? Okay. And this muscle here, the Quadratus Lumborum, is a really big player in this whole mechanism. It's like a small muscle, but when you add in the other layers of the back extensors, so this whole group of muscles that go from basically your tailbone right up to the base of your skull, they all kind of work as a big team. Um, you have kind of like the abdominal on the front, you have multiple layers. So on the back, you have multiple layers. And so this is one of our deep layers muscles here. So to get to this one, you've got to go through basically your rectus spinae muscles, which are three big muscles that kind of like lay and throw across on top of each other, which we might show in a little bit as well. So we have the attachments of the Quadratus Lumborum is basically the iliac crest here. So you can kind of see it's right on the top of the crest. So it's not on the inside, it's not on the outside, it's kind of on the thick ridge of the bone. It also attaches onto the iliolumbar ligament, which is this ligament here, which attaches from the fifth lumbar vertebrae, the transverse process of the fifth lumbar vertebrae. Flip around. Okay. And it goes onto the ilium here. So it's actually quite a big, strong ligament, right? And what that does is it helps stabilizes the lower back, the L5 vertebrae particularly. Okay. So this QL attaches a little bit to this ligament as well. So when you're moving the QL, you're going to be pulling on the pelvis, and you're also going to be pulling on this ligament here a little bit. Or another way of thinking about pulling is just the load and the transfer of forces are going through those ligaments. So just move it back around, come from the back of you again. And then we have attachments onto all the transverse processes of the lumbar spine. So L1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So they're physically attaching onto your lower back vertebrae. And then often forgotten is attaches onto the 12th rib here on the bottom. Okay. And on this side, there's no skeletal attachment. That's just more muscle here. That's the obliques coming around the side. So This will then describe what this muscle does. So when you think about a muscle contracting or doing its action, muscles contract and the small fibers, the actin myosin fibers, they do what's called cross bridging. They kind of glide across each other. And when you relax, they kind of uncouple and then they return back to a resting position. So if the pelvis is nice and stabilized and fixed and the muscle contracts, it's going to pull down this way. Okay. So it's going to pull down the bottom rib. Okay. Now, depending on the position of your pelvis, okay, if it's pulling down this way, okay, it might just stabilize the lower back, as in like it's not going to create a lot of movement. But if your pelvis was a little bit more anteriorly rotated, okay, if it's pulling here, it's going to then kind of pull this section down, which will increase the lumbar lordosis or the extension. So like a lot of things in movement, it depends on where the joints and positions and orientation is. So organization of your body in space, your setup technique is super important because that all often dictate what the movement or the muscle or the joint will be, just where you start and where you finish. So a good friend of mine used to always say, how you start is how you finish. So when you're training, set up your posture, your technique, your alignment first before you execute until you're really well trained, and it just becomes almost instinctual and you just kind of do it anyway. Okay, that's repetition, baby. All right, repetition, repetition, repetition. Okay, now we have two. There's one here and there's one there. So it's a bilateral muscle. Now, if it's just the muscle on its own contracting, all right, you're going to get what's called lateral flexion. So you're going to side bend out to the side. So this is an important side bender. It works with those hip flexor muscles, the psoas on the front, and then also the obliques on the side to side bend. It's one of the reasons why I love side planks so much. Because when you do side planks properly against gravity, you are really training this muscle here. And we know from a lot of literature and a lot of research, this is a really, really important muscle for chronic lower back pain. We can get this muscle strong and functional. You can kind of see just from where it's attaching onto basically all your lumbar vertebrae, the pelvis and the bottom rib, it's going to have a big role in lower back pain. So you want to get this muscle really, really healthy. There are also some big trigger points. There's 4 big trigger points in the QL. And so learning how to do self-myofascial release with a ball is really helpful because you can kind of get into these muscles here, release the overactive trigger points, help the muscle reset to a lengthening position, and then you can train it in that resting position. Okay. So when you're doing a rehab program, often we do a combination of kind of like this Venn diagram, self-myofascial release or massage or bodywork, depending on what stage you're at. Mobility and flexibility so that the joint and the muscle can move to its full range and return back to its resting range. Okay. And then strength and endurance training. So the muscle has enough strength to be able to resist the forces that are being put into it, but then also enough endurance to be able to do it on repetition, all day, every day type situation, strength endurance. Okay. And then from there, once you have that nice kind of Venn diagram, you can then start to specify more in terms of what's your work role, what do you do, do you need more strength, do you need more endurance, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so then, but once you need that foundational piece taken care of first, if you skip ahead, you're essentially just setting up for re-injury or getting back in that kind of chronic pain cycle that often people find themselves in. So when that muscle contracts on its own, it's either going to be doing neutralizing, so stabilizing the lower back. So think you're in a plank and you're holding the plank. So abs on the front and QL on the back are stabilizing the spine, keeping it fairly neutral, or stiff is another word people often use. If you're in a little bit more anterior tilt or extension already, it's going to help you move into extension or a back bend. So really important for any back bend type movement. So, and back bending is really, really important to restore because anytime you look up, you've got to bend your back. So it's a key movement. And people who've got back pain often because extension is loading into the discs and into the joints, initially can quite be uncomfortable. So you need to know how to actually progress exercises and very gentle, very easy to quite challenging type exercises. All right. And then if it's bilateral, so if you're getting both muscles working bilaterally, you're going into back extension. And then it's also when you take an inhale, it stabilizes bottom rib. So it keeps the bottom rib down, and you can feel it like on if you kind of breathe into your lower back just above the ribs, you can feel the ribs expand and then relax as you breathe in and then as you breathe out. So it's an important role in stabilizing the bottom rib in inhalation and then exhalation as well, particularly in inhalation. So as you breathe in, the rib cage wants to expand to get more air into the lungs. So this bottom rib here is going to move downward and out to create more space. And so then you get rotation, which is probably the most advanced one. So you can imagine if you are walking or running as you are stepping one leg forward, creates a rotation through the torso. And so you get one muscle contracts and then the opposite side of one muscle relaxes. So we have this kind of reciprocal inhibition of relax, contract, which is walking. So this is often why I say that walking is one of the master skills, because all movement is pretty much orientated around being able to walk or gait. This concept of reciprocal inhibition, so that you can navigate correctly. If you can't relax these muscles, if both muscles are really tight and kind of locked in, okay, you'll have a restriction in the rotation in the pelvis and then also in the joints. And that actually creates more tension and more resistance and more friction in these lumbar joints. And that can kind of create issues down the track. So at some point, we want to train all 6 movements of the spine. So there are really 6 ways we move the spine. So there's stabilization or stiffening the spine or bracing the spine. That's one. We have flexion, so like a sit-up type movement, and then we have extension, which is your back bend type movement. So that's 3. Then we have lateral flexion, so side bending to the side. And then we have, so that's 3, that's 4. Then we have rotation, so we're turning or twisting. That's 5. And then we have anti-rotation. So imagine you're doing a suitcase carry, or you're carrying a shopping bag in one hand, and it's stabilizing you to stop the body from twisting out of position. So resisting rotation. Okay, it's kind of like a plank, but with a rotation coming into it. So we want to be able to train all 6 of those movements effectively, and the QL has a role in all 6 of those movements. So when you're doing a plank, the QL is active. When you're coming into a sit-up, the QL needs to be relaxing to actually stretch out as part of reciprocal inhibition. So sit-ups can be a good way to actually help the QL muscles release, or not so much doing lots of sit-ups, but like coming up into a gentle sit-up and holding and breathing. Or think about child's pose, which is like an upside down sit-up. Okay, so you can really use forward flexion or forward folds to help reciprocally relax the QL. When you're doing a lateral flexion, so your side crunches or side planks, QL's active. When you're doing back bends, so think of your up dog type thing or cobra type movements or Superman type movements or hyperextension movements or good mornings, deadlifts, when you're coming up into back bends, particularly depending how you do your technique, super active in those movements. If you're doing like a farmer's carrying a suitcase, shopping in one hand, you've got the anti-rotational movement. And then when you're walking, running, jogging, dancing, doing karate kicks, soccer kicks, you're like anything with like one leg forward, one leg back. All right, okay, walking, this muscle is active as well. So it's basically in the center of the body. This is also another reason why we call this core training. When you look at this kind of region through here, it's the center. Literally your center of gravity sits. This is your ASIS here, anterior superior iliac spine. Okay, there. And then the top of the ridge of your pelvis here. So your center of gravity typically orientates just in front of your 3rd lumbar vertebrae or just below your belly button. So in this region through here. Okay, all right. And then you can see like the ridge of the pelvis kind of lines up with that kind of L3, L4 level there. All right, so this typically for most people is where your body mass is centered in here. So all the weight is coming through the torso, through the body, through the hips, through the legs, through this region here. So if your core, if your abs, if your lower back, if your obliques, it's not really strong or they don't work very well, okay, then a lot of loading comes through your lumbar spine. and then movement is compromised a lot as well. So, and things just don't work very well. So if we can get this bad boy well functional, unlike my grandma, you can resolve a lot of back problems pretty quickly by addressing this movement here. Okay. So one of the best ways to start training this muscle is you can do gentle farmer's carries. So grab like a 4 kilo kettlebell or a 5 kilo dumbbell, hold it by one side, stay up nice and upright, nice tall posture, and then just walk forward and backwards. And then just keep upright, and you don't have to like lock everything in and be really stiff, just kind of like walk naturally with good posture. And you can do it both sides. You can carry the weight on the same side and carry the weight on the other side, and you're going to get training effects there. It's a great way of getting this muscle starting to be active. If that's a bit too strong, because if you do have like a fairly recent back problems, that might because always the problem is if you've got a tear here, for example, if you sprain this muscle, as soon as you contract the muscle, it pulls on the fibers, right? And so the fibers need to be basically the cleanup crew comes in, gets rid of all the dead tissue, and then the next crew comes in, they start building up a scaffold, and then the next crew comes in, they start laying down new protein fibers and things like that. So if you're putting too much force through the muscle and the scaffolding's not done or the foundation's not laid down and the proteins haven't really connected back, and then there's actually mechanical resistance that needs to happen. So the proteins, they kind of glue together, they cross bridge together, then they start to retrain the sliding gliding. If you go too quickly, if you rehab, you break down that process. Okay. But if you don't do your rehab, if you don't start to kind of like put a little bit of tension through the tissue, okay, then it will kind of heal, but to a really weak position. And so as soon as you challenge it, it can then kind of re-injure again because you just haven't retrained the nervous system and also the mechanical properties of the proteins of the fibers to actually resist tension coming through. All right, think about a hair. One hair on its own is quite weak, but if you get like a whole strand of hair and then you braid it and then pull on it, it's actually really, really strong. Same thing with the biological system in terms of muscle fibers, except they are responsive. Okay, they have some little stretch and some give, and then they get stronger. And that's all controlled by the nervous system. And so then you have the nerves are coming out basically locally at the spinal level, innervating into your QL. So if you've had a neural injury, so like a disc injury, which has compressed the nerve root, then once the disc injury is healed, we can then retrain this muscle again. So it's all about just understanding where you are in the healing process in a continuum, to very acute to long-term chronic. Okay, and then what's the most appropriate intervention or exercise to introduce at that stage? If you can nail that, then you're doing really, really well. Okay. So if you're farmer carrying doing that, another way is like your 4-point kneeling hip extension or a bird dog is great because when you lift up your leg, you are going to really challenge this. Let's see if we can see this in motion. So we look at Quadratus Lumborum spinal lateral flexion. So this is a good diagram here of spinal flexion, lateral flexion, so side bending. So all these muscles here contracting. So this is the obliques here. This is your erector spinae muscle. We've got 3 long threading lines of erector spinae. This white stuff here is your thoracolumbar fascia. So like your ITV band for your lower back. Super strong connective tissue. And then if we fade all, come in, maybe from the front. This orange one here underneath is our Quadratus Lumborum doing lateral flexion. So just this piece here coming down. And you can see on this side that this side has to stretch out to allow this movement to occur. So if you're doing good side planks, you're getting great stretching through here as well. So when you do strength training, particularly single leg work, it's a great opportunity to stretch the opposite muscles. Okay, so strength training done well is often really good flexibility training, particularly if you're training the full range of movement. If you're training full range of movement, okay, then you're essentially stretching the joint and the muscles to their full range. So you can kind of skip a lot of stretching if you just slow down your strength training and train full range. So what does full range mean? So for example, here in this lateral flexion, if I pause right there, the rib cage here is basically touching the top of the pelvis. So physically, you can't go any further because the bone on bone stops you moving any further. And this is one of the big restrictions on a lot of people's flexibility. It's not so much that they're trying to stretch and stretch and stretch and stretch, but it's more of the actual the structure of the bones. Okay. For some people, just the structure of their anatomy means that they physically can't go any further because the bone on bone connection. And you'll see that a lot, particularly in the lumbar spine, depending how flexi-bend you are doing back bends. You'll see it a lot in the hips, particularly hip mobility, when the femur actually comes up and starts to connect into either the acetabulum or the actual ilium itself. You'll see it a lot in shoulder mobility. Okay. Having said that, if you don't practice, if you don't train, you will be stiff and you'll be tight and you'll have restriction of movement. And the problem with that is if you don't train, say the full range example on the QL on the left side here, then you don't get the full stretch out on the right side. And so the right side gets stiff. All right. So if you've got a good training program, like a good functional core training program, you're training your QLs, you're also training the opposite side, the QLs on the opposite side and vice versa, which is pretty cool. So you can see that would be a side plank. So if you had your arm out on the floor and you're in that kind of horizontal position, this would be side plank. So you're getting all these muscles here working against gravity to stabilize you. And then you're getting the top muscles are all starting to get stretched out. And if you're doing this one in standing, then it's a bit different. Now this side that's working is eccentrically lengthening, and this side is contracting a little bit, but essentially you're just using the weight of your torso to tip to the side, and gravity kind of takes care of business. And then it's this muscle here on the other side, which has to lengthen with control, which is what we call eccentric contraction. Okay. So that's where you do like your standing dumbbell lateral raise, lateral flexion, okay, to get this nice strengthening movement here. So in this case, you'd be holding a dumbbell on this left arm hanging down here. Okay, dumbbell increases the side bend, more eccentric work here, and then it's this muscle here that has to pull you back up to the middle as well. So those are really, really, really good movements when done effectively with good technique, et cetera, et cetera. Like all exercise, it's not really bad exercise, bad movements. It's just things done inappropriately or poor technique or poor progressions. Okay. All right, let me stop the share here. Come back. And let's just quickly show you a couple of layers of the lower back while we're here. So if we add in some more layers, so here we've got these long muscles that are coming up here through the spine. And these are the multifidi. So these are muscles that basically thread up from level to level and go transverse process, spinous process, transverse process, and spinous process. And then we have here the intertransversori, and then the that's the right. That's not showing me the right one. That's not the psoas. What are you talking about? I know it is the psoas, and it's just hidden behind it. That's the one I'm looking at here. And intertransversi, and these ones here. Okay, lateral intertransversori. So you've got these little muscles that go from transverse process to transverse process, okay, on the outside, and then also basically on the vertebral body to the vertebral body on the inside. So think like a ship mast, all these little stabilizing ropes that come up each mast. Okay, similar kind of concept there. And they thread all the way up the spine. And so you've got some long ones up here. The next layer on, you have all these ligaments that are touching. So more ligaments up here again. It's our organs. So they're two kidneys, and they're going to sit right behind the 12th rib here. So when you're doing a lot of back work, you're getting this kind of organ massage into the kidneys. Okay. Abdominal wall. So you got your transverse abdominis, rectus abdominis, and on the back. We now have our iliacus lumborum, longissimus, thoracics, spinalis. So we have these, and we'll do a whole video on these as well. So you basically have the back extensors. So you got spinalis, you have longissimus, and then iliocostalis, and they're in sections. So you have like the middle section, lumbar section, and then cervical section for the neck as well. So you got these three big layers of muscle that are threading up the back. So that's not just QL helping you back extensions, all these muscles. All right. So we'll do another video on those coming up soon. I can hear my dogs going crazy up the backyard. So that's the signal for me to go and sort my dogs out. If you're liking these videos, give me a thumbs up, comment below, like and share. As always, feed the YouTube algorithm, all hail the YouTube algorithm, and we'll see you in the next video. Cheers.